You don't wake up lazy. You wake up tired of starting your days, already behind yourself. Before your feet even hit the floor, your brain is already racing unfinished tasks, half-kept promises, that low-grade guilt humming in the background like a bad electrical wire in the wall. You tell yourself today will be different. You really mean it this time. But there's a quiet dread under that optimism, because you've said those words before and you know how the story usually ends. Not in failure, in delay, in distraction, in another day that slips through your fingers while you swear you were busy. Here's the painful truth no one says out loud. You don't procrastinate because you're lazy. You procrastinate because your mind is overwhelmed before you even begin. And that overwhelm feels safer than action, because at least overwhelm doesn't require you to expose yourself. And that's where this habit starts. Not with productivity, not with discipline, but with relief. Procrastination isn't about avoiding work. It's about avoiding the feeling that comes before the work. That tightness in your chest when you think about starting. That subtle fear that once you begin, you'll see how far behind you really are. Or worse, how much effort it's actually going to take. Your brain hates open loops. Big tasks feel like bottomless pits. You don't see an end, so your nervous system treats the whole thing like a threat. And when the brain senses threat, it doesn't ask what's meaningful. It asks what's comfortable. So you scroll, you snack, you reorganize things that don't matter. You do anything that gives you a quick sense of control without real exposure. And every time you avoid starting, your brain learns something dangerous. Escape works. That's why telling yourself to just focus never works. You're not dealing with a discipline problem. You're dealing with a nervous system that doesn't trust beginnings anymore. There's a very specific moment where procrastination is born. It's not hours into the task. It's not even 10 minutes in. It's right at the threshold, when you haven't started yet, but you're close enough to feel the weight of it. This is where your thoughts get loud. What if I do it wrong? What if this takes forever? What if I start and realize I'm not as good as I thought? And here's the cruel irony. The longer you wait, the heavier the task feels. Not because it's changing, but because your imagination is feeding on uncertainty. The monster grows only in the dark. You don't need motivation here. You need momentum, and momentum doesn't come from confidence. It comes from contact. This is where the 5-minute habit quietly steps in and changes the entire equation. The habit is simple, almost offensively simple. You don't commit to finishing. You don't commit to doing it well. You commit to 5 minutes of visible, irreversible action. 5 minutes where the task becomes real. The document opens. The shoes go on. The code editor loads. The first line is written. The body moves. The loop closes. Here's why this works. Your brain calms down the moment it sees proof of motion. 5 minutes is short enough that your nervous system doesn't panic, but long enough to break the illusion that the task is infinite. And something subtle happens in those 5 minutes. You stop imagining the work and start experiencing it. The fear loses oxygen. The resistance weakens, not because you forced it, but because you stop feeding it uncertainty. Sometimes you'll keep going. Sometimes you'll stop after 5 minutes. And both outcomes are wins, because you trained your brain to associate starting with safety instead of threat. This habit doesn't make you productive. It makes you unstuck. The real damage of procrastination isn't lost time. It's the erosion of trust between you and yourself. Every delay is a quiet promise broken. Every later chips away at your word until even you don't believe it anymore. But when you start showing up for 5 minutes, especially on days you don't feel like it, something powerful begins to rebuild. Not motivation, not confidence, credibility. You start proving something to yourself. That you don't need perfect energy to move. That you don't need the right mood to begin. That you can act without negotiating with every thought that passes through your head. And that changes how you see yourself. You stop being someone who plans to change and start becoming someone who moves even when it's uncomfortable, quietly, without drama. That identity shift is everything. One day, you notice something different. Tasks don't loom the way they used to. Your mornings feel lighter, not because life got easier, but because you're no longer at war with beginnings. You trust yourself again, not because you're perfect, but because you've learned how to meet resistance without flinching. 5 minutes at a time, over and over, until starting feels normal again. And here's the part that stays with you. You realize progress was never about massive effort. It was about making the first move feel safe enough to repeat. You don't kill procrastination by fighting it. You starve it by starting small, by showing your brain there's nothing to run from. And once that clicks, something settles in your chest. A calm, a steadiness, a sense that no matter how heavy life gets, you know how to begin. And that's enough to change everything.